So we saw that young gentleman, he's new at American Airlines. He won't even admit how soon he will be able to make captain. I'm one of those guys, I got to spend 22 years of my life in that right seat. But it was cool, and I'll tell you why. I was good at it. That's right. And I already paid for a heckler to be in the audience. Thank you so much. But my favorite number sequence, and you're going to see a lot of numbers today, I'm kind of a numbers geek, is 22, 5, and 0. Because when you're a first officer forever, you hit a point where you've got a pretty good life. So 22 years in the right seat, 5 sons, I specialize, and between them and me, 0 days spent in jail. So I think that's a success story. I'm very proud of that. And the other joke that I will actually be sharing today is during those 22 years, I realized, and I can thank you for this, every American Airlines pilot is great. I'm serious. Some are great, some are really great, and unfortunately we have some ingrates, but everybody's great. And I learned a lot along the way. I got to upgrade to captain about 5 years ago. I'm one of those guys where I did my stuff in the military. At 17 years old, I put on the uniform, and by the time I finished up active duty and became an airline pilot, I couldn't wait to fly the line and leave me alone. Let me just be under the radar. But along the way, and some of you know my story, at my guard unit, I got to know a phenomenal chaplain. And this guy was just the kind of guy you could talk to about anything. And I knew when I spoke to him that it was confidential. If you know anything about military chaplaincy, it is literally unrestricted confidentiality. I could have told that guy that I had just killed my brother and buried him in the backyard, and he not only wouldn't say anything, he couldn't say anything. That's how sacred the nature of confidentiality was. And I was so inspired that my last 7 years in the military, while I was flying at American Airlines, I was a military chaplain. So I got to be a chaplain for the pilots that I used to fly with. And that's the other thing that I learned, is because if you're, we call them crew dogs in the Air Force, if you're a crew dog and a chaplain walks in the room, you think to yourself, nice guy, wrong planet. Okay? They don't understand, right? They're kind of in the stratosphere with their Bibles and the Lord. But when you can get someone who understands. And so, as God would have it, about 2011 was when American Airlines launched this thing called Project Wingman. And that's why I got turned on, because the whole concept is, just like a safety program, we don't want any politics. We just want to take care of people. And I will take it to the mat for anybody. I call myself a mercenary. I will use the company resources, I will use the union resources, I will use outside resources, because taking care of each other is the right thing to do. And I don't think anybody here could deny that. So you'll see our logo. When Project Wingman was born in 2011, APA came up with this great idea, and the company finally said, you know what, let's do this, let's support it. The reason that's important, and even a lot of people today don't quite understand, is because the company supports the union's efforts, we get to do things nobody else can. For example, today I will be at 2:30 p.m. in a room full of brand new pilots on their very first day. They will be there with their spouses. And I get to tell them from day one that we do it differently at American Airlines, right? We're not like the other carriers, like I think there's some obscure company, Georgia, they're named after, I think, the 4th letter of the Greek alphabet. They don't do it as well as we do, you know? And there are peer volunteers, union guys and gals throughout the industry. They do a great job taking care of everybody. The union people are, the volunteers are the backbone. I was a union volunteer for 8 years. They do the work, they take the calls. Here's the difference. When the company says we support the program, then you get to publicize the program. When somebody has a problem, for example, and their son dies of suicide, and the company says we have 3 days of bereavement, I can take that person and I can get them what they need, because who here wants to be in the flight deck with somebody who just lost their kid last week? It doesn't even make sense. So the union are the workhorses. Love those guys, used to be one, but it's my honor now that I get to elevate it on the company side when appropriate. And the thing is it's still all about confidentiality. As long as we can make people know that their secrets are safe with us, They're willing to get the help that they need. Every single person in this room knows somebody who's no longer with us because they got overwhelmed with life. And every time we can make that difference, and we do, and do it consistently, it's an incredible thing. So, thank you. And I'm going to clap too because it ain't me. It ain't me. It's a team sport. It's a team sport. Almost any time we help somebody, it's like they talk about the safety chain when things don't go right. In peer support, it's the other way around. I didn't plan on telling you this, but just this morning, I got in touch with Charlie Carreri, the guy who launched Project Wingman. And Charlie did great stuff. Well, I had found out that we lost one of our pilots this week. We lost one of our pilots this week to suicide. And did you know that Charlie and this pilot went to UPT together in Texas, his Air Force? He served with this guy. So Charlie's heart is broken, and Charlie's heart is filled because instead of somebody making a cold call to this family, we've got a resource because we work together, and Charlie can now be part of that family as they grieve and move into a better place. And these kind of connections are vital. When we don't work together, we don't help everybody. When we do work together, everything's amazing. And we all know the saying. It's amazing what you can accomplish when nobody cares who gets the credit. And I don't give a rip who gets the credit as long as we're taking care of each other. And what's cool about me is, unlike a lot of other people with company jobs, if they want to fire me, I have this beautiful thing called a seniority number, and I'll go back and I'll fly jets full time. So I got to fly on Monday. I'm going to fly tomorrow morning. I still get to fly, but this is my passion. And God bless the Gray Eagles for letting me speak. And if you've heard me talk before, I have plans and networking, and it's taking a lot of time because I don't have enough bandwidth. I'm the only company guy who does this wingman stuff. But if you think that you're forgotten because you're retired, you're wrong. Because I believe in that. I am a Gray Eagle myself, and it's that important. And my friend here, Kevin Buckrucker, he's one of those guys. He's like, Greg, let's do more. And I have some great plans to do more. I already have a website registered. I'm thinking about it. I'm networking. And if it takes me till I'm 65 to keep doing it, because I'm sorry, once a wingman, always a wingman. And the way that you guys take care of each other is part of what this whole thing is. It's not necessarily even a formal program. It's just people looking out for each other without fear and in a positive, affirmative way, making sure that everybody is taken care of and that nobody feels alone. I'm going to tell you today what my talk is not, okay? I did go through Air Force Safety School at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico for 6 weeks and did a little bit of safety. I went to a reform school in Colorado Springs for 4 years, and I have a degree in human factors engineering. But I'm not about to stand here today and to pretend to you I know all the reasons why this accident took place. That's not my role. I'm not a safety guy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the human side. And any data that you see is stuff that you can find yourself online. This is not privileged information, but here's the crazy part of my life. 4 weeks ago to the day, I finished talking to those new hires, just like I am today, because we have new hires coming in every week. And when that was done, I went to my office, I grabbed my suitcase, and I got on an airplane at 5 p.m. because, you see, I've been working with a lot of other people in industry on finding ways that we as the FAA and we as the airlines and we as the unions can take better care of people, especially considering that we all struggle. And so we need to make it less stigmatized and give people more empowerment to really take care of themselves. And I'll say this to any pilot. Would I rather be with some guy in the right seat who is going through hell and not quite sure if he wants to get up this morning and who's hiding it from everybody? Or how about if that person has the same wisdom, self-awareness, humility, and courage to say, I'd like to talk to somebody about what's going on. Who is safer? Are you kidding me? And that's what we're trying to do, to recognize the humanity in all of us. And I'm so passionate because I know when you know it's confidential, then you can relax. You can talk to somebody. You don't have to worry, how's this going to affect my ticket? And what's cool now is we have a new FAA federal administrator. Her name's Susan Northrup. She was in the Air Force. She was a flight surgeon. Her husband's a retired airline pilot. I've heard her say this in public several times now. If a pilot goes in for counseling, it is not reportable. You no longer have to worry, oh my gosh, I either lie about it or I don't get the counseling. One of my favorite jokes is when I was a young Air Force lieutenant, I knew that my marriage was on the rocks. And that little voice in my head said, it's time to get some help. But I was in the good old Strategic Air Command. I had a top secret clearance. So if they found out that I was getting marriage counseling, what would happen to my top secret clearance? In fact, what would happen to my career potential as an Air Force officer? So with all the wisdom of a 25-year-old, I decided, I'm not going to do that, we'll just see how it goes. 33 years later, I'm pleased to tell you that my ex-wife and I get along brilliantly. Okay? And when I hear those stories, it's pathetic. Because what could be better and more healthy? I'll be honest with you, I think if you've been married more than about 7 or 8 years and you haven't had marriage counseling, that should be reportable to the FAA. So this stuff is real, and it is a privilege. So thank you to the Gray Eagles for letting me have the microphone. I'm thankful to be a Gray Eagle. So, yes, thank you. So, getting into my story, I got on that airplane 4 weeks ago at 5 p.m. and flew to DC. I was deadheading. I was in seat 28C. And typical flight, I was half dozing, half emailing, whatever it was, and I could tell that we were descending and getting lower on final. And if you've ever flown into DC, you go right over the Potomac, and I'm starting to see the lights. Here we go. Okay, so this will be the flow. I'm setting the stage. Oh, and I should also say, does anybody know the difference between an aviation story and a fairy tale? A fairy tale begins with once upon a time. An aviation story is there I was. Okay? But that, all kidding aside, this literally was a case for me of there I was. And I'll take you through that. We'll talk about the, I guess we're going the wrong direction. Here we go. How did the general public react? How do we look at it as an aviation family? Facts or feelings, an integrated life, and the conclusion. And I'm going to draw a little bit on some of my trauma and things that I've learned along the way. So here we go. There I was, and this is true. I was on my way into Washington, D.C. And the reality is not lost on me that out of all the places I could have been, and the meeting I was attending, we had been meeting virtually for a long time. It's a kind of a conglomerate. We're finding ways to better take care of our pilots. We've got doctors and union folks and different experts. We're just trying to make things even better. And as we were coming down on final, all of a sudden, we started powering up. And if you've ever been an airline guy and maybe you mess something up and it's time to take it around, the old saying is, the captain would say, you just keep flying and I will start lying, right? And so I heard the captain say, hey, ladies and gentlemen, there's traffic and we're taking it around. And it was kind of bumpy coming in. I thought, maybe he didn't set up well. Here we are. And then he said, we are now diverting to Dulles. Washington National will not be open for quite some time. That's all we knew. So to give you a little bit of a spatial view, and again, you can find all of this online. You see runway 1 going north, and then you've got runway 33, which goes to the northwest. And a lot of the regional pilots, when they will come into runway 1, they'll get cleared a circling maneuver because they can actually keep things moving, make a little bit of a right turn to set up, and then roll out on runway 33. You can see runway 33 is a mile long, only 5,200 feet, so it's a little bit shorter. So Blue Streak 5342 was the quote-unquote American Airlines crash. And I don't know about any of you, but I got all kinds of texts and everything. Hey, there's been an American Airlines crash. It was not an American Airlines airplane, but it was an aircraft owned by PSA. And if you know kind of the origin of the name, it's Pacific Southwest Airlines. But Blue Streak 5342 was the call sign on that airplane, and they were flying a CRJ. There were 63 people on board, and as you see from the location, they were coming in from Wichita, Kansas. So Blue Streak 5342 is coming up to runway 1. They make a right offset to line up to land on 33. They were cleared a circling maneuver. And as I talked to friends at the regionals, it's a very common thing for them to do. At the same time, that blue is the Potomac River. And there was an Army Black Hawk helicopter, Sikorsky UH-60, that was coming on a training mission just off the deck of the water. And I'm not about to say whose fault was what. I'm not going there today. But as we know the story, there was a mid-air collision. In sequence, the next flight was American 3130. That was a 737 coming in from New Orleans. The next one coming in was American 742. That was the airplane that I was on as a passenger. And they sent American 3130 around to the west to get out of the traffic area. They sent American 742 around. And then when I checked after I landed, American 1855 was on our tail. What was interesting about 1855, and I did that wrong, it's also a 737, the first officer there is a retired colonel that I wrote his letter of recommendation, and he flies for American Airlines, so I knew that guy too. He said they didn't see anything. But when we landed, we just knew we were going around. And then in this era of cell phone technology, people on the airplane started saying, hey, they were whispering, no one panicked, but they were saying, it sounds like there might have been some kind of a crash. And when I turned on my phone, this great young lady that I've mentored, who just got hired at Envoy, she rather sent me a text that said, there has been a mid-air collision at Washington National. So that was when I realized. And that whole announcement about Washington National is now closed was for a very, very good reason. So American 3130, they actually diverted to Baltimore. We took a left turn and headed right over to Dulles and landed. Because of where we were in the queue, we got a gate right away. I know there were a lot of airplanes that got packed up. So we parked and everyone started getting off the airplane. And I think those who knew were just trying to process it. There wasn't bedlam in the flight deck, but everyone was kind of trying to figure out, okay, how do I get to where I need to go from Dulles versus National? And there might be a crash, and I think everyone was just processing it. And I kind of waited because I don't find it a coincidence that I was where I was when I was. We haven't had an accident like this for 16 years. We hadn't met with this committee yet. And knowing a little bit about life and trauma, I figured those pilots up front probably had a little bit to unpack, right? And when the passengers were off, I went up to the front, I saw the captain, and asked if he was okay. He said, yeah, we're doing fine. He said, I didn't see anything, but my FO saw the whole thing. So the captain, being a good captain, had his flashlight and he was going to do the walk around. And the FO came out of the lab, and you could just tell a true professional. He looked sharp. He told me he was an Air Force C-17 pilot in the Air National Guard. But the look on his face betrayed the fact that he had just seen something that none of us would want to see. And I know there are people in this room who have seen things like that, and we all know it's surreal. And that was a look that I gave him. But what was such a privilege to me, and I'm no hero, but I was the guy who's been doing this for 20 years with the right training, and I got to have some good conversations. And I asked them how they were doing, how they were feeling. Where are you going? They said, we're both from DC, we're just gonna go home. That's great, do you have anybody there? And they both said yes. And I know specifically the first officer said he had a wife at home and some kids. So they were on their way. And I said, I hope you don't mind, but our union does some great work. You're probably gonna hear from our critical incident response folks. And I didn't even have to call them. They both told me later that someone from the union reached out, had another conversation. How are you doing? Are you okay? And it was very much appreciated. And again, the crazy thing about God and the time-space continuum, when I came to work the next week on Monday, right? I've got an office that's a little bit off to the side if people want to come talk to me confidentially to close the door. And I stepped up to take that break out of my office. And here we are with 16,000, now 240 pilots. And as I take a break out of my office, a gentleman is walking to exit the door, and it was the first officer on that flight, right? I didn't plan this. I got to say hello. I got to see how he was doing. He was clearly doing okay, but you could tell that connection It makes a difference. And that's really the heart of this whole Project Women thing, or call it what you will. This is the heart of why you're here today, because we have to connect. And if we choose not to, we just don't do as well. This stuff is real. And that's why, again, I don't know how or why God put me into this position, but here I am, and it's very humbling. I am not any kind of a guru. I just happen to be this mishmash of experience, time and place, and I'm going to continue now to kind of share you some of my observations from this. So we're going to kind of get into what this really means for all of us. Okay, so I didn't mention it before, but a little bit on PSA. PSA has 1,800 pilots. PSA is one of our 3 wholly owned regional carriers. We've got PSA, Piedmont, and Envoy. Tomorrow I will be flying a turn out of Charlotte, and when I'm done I will go to my office in Charlotte because that's where I live. And where my office is in Charlotte shares space with people from PSA. The crew that flew that airplane was Charlotte based, and every single PSA pilot comes through Charlotte. I don't know personally the people who passed away, but I know a lot of people who sure did. The other thing that, again, if you want to talk about this cosmic world, the aircraft, the CRJ 700 that went into the Potomac, it was the most famous airplane that PSA flew. You're like, what? Yes. This airplane was landing in Charlotte. Actually, I think it might have been a takeoff. And of all things, North Carolina is beautiful with green trees. A deer ran across the runway. The wing of the aircraft, tail number 709 Papa Sierra, struck the deer and decapitated the deer, and they were able to take off and come back and land safely. So this plane was famous, and it was called the Bambi Killer. Seriously. And I don't know if it's legend or not, but one of the pilots said, yeah, we're pretty sure that the ground guys took it home and did jerky, steaks, and sausage. So I don't know if that's true. But this airplane, everybody knew it, and the people who flew it said, oh yeah, I flew that airplane. But again, you talk about that association we have with accidents, they're part of that. They flew that metal, right? And that's the airplane that went into the Potomac. So as far as how the general public reacted, here we go. I got all kinds of calls. Well, Greg, I thought it was an American Airlines flight. So I had to explain, well, it was, but it wasn't. And that's a little thing we all know as major airline pilots is the corporation does a wonderful job saying, you're flying on American Airlines. Maybe, maybe not. And so I still to this day think that a lot of people thought that this was literally an American Airlines crash, not understanding it was one of our regional carriers. And the thing that makes me laugh a little bit is, what's a regional airline? I was coming out of the Air Force in 1998. I was stationed up in Oklahoma active duty. American Airlines flew me down here to interview. And one of the things I read in all the interview gouges, we call it, was always make sure you go up front, introduce yourself to the pilots, because they might ask you during your interview, so who flew you to Dallas? So I'm, got my new suit on as this Air Force guy, and jump on this flight out of Oklahoma City, and I go up front and introduce myself to the pilots, and I'm excited. And I said, hey guys, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Greg Clark. I'm on here to do an interview. He goes, you're doing an interview? I said, yeah. Who with? I said, who with American Airlines? And they're like, we're Eagle. And he was not impressed to see this young Air Force guy, right? Whoop. So that was kind of my introduction to, yeah, it's American Airlines, kind of. And then as far as what's PSA, I've talked a little bit about that already. A lot of people didn't know. To this day, I don't think a lot of the public understands the difference. In fact, if you think of the last major crash, which I'm going to talk about, it was also a regional aircraft. That was in 2009. I'm not pointing fingers, I'm just saying people don't understand it. And this is the one I'm going to dial in on a little bit. I thought flying was safe. And now, call it Murphy's Law or whatever, we're hearing about all these different things, that are going on and near misses and what have you. I think part of that might be kind of a coincidence that things right now are a little different, and we know there's a lot of inexperience out there, but I also think it's kind of like when you see a green VW and start looking for them, they're everywhere. But either way, this is kind of, I think, a lot of the public's take is, hey, maybe this really isn't as safe as I thought it was. Here's how we process it. And I love this quote. Anybody heard of Flight of the Intruder? This is the author Stephen Koontz, who won the Distinguished Flying Cross. He says, mistakes are inevitable in aviation, especially when one is still learning new things. The trick is to not make a mistake that will kill you. And again, I'm not here to assess blame. In fact, the more I see, I think those regional pilots did what anybody could possibly do. They were just flying their airplane, and there was someone from below that maybe wasn't where they thought they were, and a lot of people passed away, and that's hard stuff. But I'll do this. If you are an aviator here, or even if you're here supporting an aviator, will you please raise your hand if you know somebody who's died in an aviation crash? Absolutely. I don't think there's a hand here that's not up. And that's what I thought about as well, is the traveling public, it is so safe that this just literally blows their minds. But as a military pilot, I've got friends who aren't here. I got hired with one guy in '98. This guy was as sharp as they came. His call sign was McFly. He flew F-16s. He was at Hill Air Force Base. And within, I think while I was still in formation, he had a moment of inattention, and his body was strewn for a mile over the desert floor of Utah. It's just, flying is unforgiving. And I guarantee you, McFly was a better pilot than I am, right? So I'm not into the blame game. I'm into what can we learn and how can we do it even better than we have before. So here's some real numbers. Like I said, admittedly, I am a numbers guy. I think quantitatively, and check this out. This was the last major airline accident, Colgan Air Flight. It was over New York. They encountered some icing, they stalled, and as the investigation revealed, they probably didn't handle the stall in the most optimal way. It changed a lot of things, including pilot fatigue, how we determined, because if you'll remember, the first officer on that flight, not only had she never seen icing, she had FedExed herself from the West Coast, which means that the night before the flight, she went from the West Coast to Memphis over to the East Coast and started flying. And so she probably wasn't on her A game anyway. So that kind of moved the needle on that, but it also changed the experience level of what you had to have to become a regional airline pilot. This was where that all happened. 49 plus 1, 49 people were on that aircraft, including the crew, and then unfortunately the aircraft struck a person in a house, so we lost 50 people. Now this to me is, I still process this, it's amazing, watch this. Okay, so you look at the math, that's almost 16 years between that and the midair that I was so close to. Check this out. 117 deaths in approximately 6 years. 117 deaths in approximately 6 years. Now, if you want some context, during that amount of time, Part 121, carrying passengers as commercial airliners, we moved 150,000 safe commercial flights for a total of 10 billion. I don't know if you know what the population of the Earth is, it's 8 billion. 10 billion passengers flew safely, okay? 117 deaths. I mourn and I celebrate at the same time, because this is incredible. It's unprecedented. Now watch this. In that same amount of time, and I crunched these numbers myself, 100 deaths a day. So I went back to the Colgan Air crash. How many people did we lose in the year 2009, 2010, 2011? And I totaled it all the way up to this crash. It came out to almost exactly 100.0 deaths per day on our public roads and highways. So if we're concerned about safety, let's watch how much we drink and pray for each other as we leave here. Seriously. Because that's the difference. 117 in 16 years, 100 deaths per day. And this is our public roads and highways. This does not count for private roads, driveways, and parking lots. So that's some context. So, facts or feelings, right? It's easy for us to see like, oh gosh, this flying thing, I don't know how safe it is. But now we have the facts. And I think one of the keys to an integrated life is to being able to bring those two things together. And I love this quote. Actually, let me run through these first. And this is my point. So we can say only 100 a day, and on January 29th, only 67 people died. Only 67. But guess what? Those were real people. And if you'll join me for a moment of silence, and I'm really serious, after that I'm going to tell you a little bit about all 4 of these people. And how do I know so much? Because I've talked to their friends. So please join me for a moment of silence for the crew of 5342. Thank you. And that's what came to my mind when I heard about the midair. Because of the work I do, I immediately just thought of all these people who dad's not coming home, or they have that thing that no parent should have to do, which is to bury a child. John Campos, amazing guy. I believe he was 40. From the age of 9, he had no father. You want to know why? Because not only did he die doing a great job as a pilot for one of our regional carriers, his father was killed on duty as a New York Police Department officer when he was 9 years old. Again, Union doing great things. We've got a guy named Harry Costa. He does a lot of the bereavement work as a union guy. He's turning 65. They're going to still use him because he's that good. He got a captain's hat. I talked to Alan Johnson. He gave the green light, and he was promoted to captain at American Airlines at his funeral because he had his flow and he was getting ready to come fly for us. He was that close. First Officer Sam Lilly, sharp kid in his 20s. He actually learned about flying from his father. And you want to know what his father did? His father flew Black Hawk helicopters for the Army. And his father had flown that same training route heading south on the Potomac. Our friend Flight Attendant Ian Epstein, if you were based in Charlotte at that training center, everybody knew Ian. Why? Because he had literally done work as a stand-up comic before becoming a flight attendant, and the guy was hilarious. You can find clips of him online now because he was just a lot of fun. He loved what he did, and he talked to the people very authentically and just really had the time of his life. Everybody loved flying with Ian. I actually, one of the guys I called, he's one of our new hires. As a check pilot, he checked out John and said he did a great job in his training. And as a PSA pilot, he said he spent a lot of time with Ian. This is one of our pilots. Those are his friends. The last one, Flight Attendant Denacia Elder, she actually had a husband. Ian had a wife. The other 2 guys were single, although John had a long-term girlfriend. Denacia made a decision. You know what? I want to be home more with my kids. So she had found an office job for PSA, and she was flying her last sequence. So let's get back to this thing of facts or feelings in integrated life. The longest journey you will ever take is the 18 inches from your head to your heart. So think of a coin. You've got 2 sides. Think of something even scientifically, like the concept of light. There are scientists who have proven it's a particle, others prove it's a wave. These 2 things can exist concurrently. And the message that I share all the time is that life is absolutely brutal, unfair, unpredictable. And life is also incredibly beautiful. And I'm convinced, amongst other strange things in the time-space continuum, that it was my privilege, to be there, to be just a very, very small part of this. I'm no hero. There were people there who spent days and who contacted the passengers' families and really, really got in there. They told us they didn't want pilots on site. They said we're a little bit too close to it and people would want to start getting technical. So we were not part of what they called the care team. But like all the wingman volunteers and myself, we've got plenty of folks who knew somebody or knew somebody who knew somebody, and we all process this stuff differently. But what I'm saying with this quote is, if we can integrate those 2 realities, we can live large. We can live in a way that says, I might die going back to the flight academy today as I go to speak to this new group of pilots, and you know what? Every day's a gift. I just don't know. But I will not live in fear. So I'm not going to ignore the facts, and I'm also going to acknowledge that sometimes life is scary and it's sad, but it doesn't help if I just pretend it didn't happen. When you talk about like epidemics of suicide and people who come back from war, those poor guys sometimes just haven't had a chance to talk it out and really integrate it. And they think that they have to do it on their own. And they even think that if they share that load with others, it somehow makes them weak. Or it makes them somehow less of a man. And I love to stand in front of groups and say that that's as far from the truth as you can get. Because I will say that a real man can stand up and say, I'm not perfect, my life is not perfect, but here's what I'm doing to make it as good as it can be. And I will take that to the bank. So, what is my conclusion about all of this? Trauma. All right? This is the best definition I've found. Trauma is an event where something fundamentally changes how your nervous system works in such a way that you function less adaptively going forward. Might sound kind of clinical, but let me just give you an example. I was a leader of a group of scouts, and we had a speaker come. This guy was in his mid-40s, very successful. And when he was 13 years old, his dad was an investment banker in New York, and they had moved out to Salt Lake City. And somehow some of the mafia kingpins had found out that the family was out west. They had a couple of thugs, basically, from organized crime, pick him up after school and kidnap him. So at the age of 13, he's in a trunk, and you can overhear the conversations about their threats to how they might execute him if they don't get what they want. But as a young Boy Scout at 13, he just decided, I'm not going to worry, I'm going to be proactive. And he was able to find a way to break out of that trunk, and when the car paused at a stoplight, he was able to escape and run for his life. And those criminals were apprehended and did time. But what he told our group of scouts, it was not only the message, don't ever give up, and thank you for being scouts because you're learning some great skills, but he also said, the interesting thing is, since that incident, I've never had a sleepless night, and I've never really struggled. And you want to know why? Because I tell this story every week. So for the rest of his life, he continues to tell that story. And guess what happens? He's not traumatized. Interesting, right? It's because he's integrating, and he's taking the internal and he's making it external. And he's taking the fear and he's implementing it with the facts. And he's bringing it all together. And this doesn't mean that we have to go on public display and vent all of our problems. But everybody in this room can benefit from having a real friend that you can just be real with. You don't even have to go to a counselor half the time. Just find someone who is willing to listen without judgment. Here's some resources just to kind of think about. And I should also mention, kind of in my journey, my sweet mother was the first wife of 4 of my father's ex-wives. My mom lasted 13 years, the next 6 years, the next was 6 months, and the next only went 6 months, or 6 weeks. My birth father was not meant for marriage, but one of the reasons why was he had bipolar disorder, and he refused to undergo any treatment. And so while I was a kid, there was definitely some drama going on, but I always thought I was a second kid. I just snuck out the back and went and played baseball with my friends. Everything's cool, right? And now all of a sudden I'm recognizing that my mom, great lady, but kind of a drill sergeant, she was doing all she could just to keep it together. My mom is a trauma victim. Never thought about it before because she's a survivor. She met a great guy, remarried. They'll be married in 47 years, and we've had a wonderful family, and it's all great stuff. She's a retired school teacher. But when you start to see that, then you look at that old lady a little differently, right? Maybe she wasn't so nasty. Maybe she wasn't quite so tough. She was just trying to survive. And because of her toughness, then at a young age I became tough. I'm like, well, I guess I'm gonna have to figure out my own way. So I got serious about school, I got serious about sports, and I got serious about leadership and paved my own way. So I'm thankful for all that. But what I'm saying is this trauma, it affects many of us. And if you've ever known anyone who had really tough things happen as a kid, if they haven't integrated that, you're probably gonna take it to the grave. So this thing called trauma is real. And again, just something as simple as being on that airplane to be able to talk to these guys. How are you guys doing? Great job, let's keep in touch. It's very powerful. So And this isn't just trauma, this is anything that you might be feeling. I'm starting to feel like a talk show host now. But in all seriousness, as I said, if you can just find people to talk to, and that's why I applaud the Gray Eagles, that's why I am a Gray Eagle, because the idea of some of our pilots who have flown well and safe and served, and then to go sit in isolation and be depressed, there's just something not quite right about that. And not everyone likes, getting together, and that's understandable. But trust me when I say you guys do amazing work, and the more people we can draw into our circle, the better. Maybe there's someone here you could just talk to if you're not doing so well. That's awesome. I hope you will. I got my number here, and just kind of like Charlie Savage said, if anybody wants to talk to me, I'm not going to not talk to anybody. The union volunteers, if you call the hotline, they're under a lot of pressure. They're volunteers. So the truth is they focus on active American Airlines pilots. But I will talk to anybody. When I'm at my office, there was one kid from PSA who was depressed. His buddy had died from suicide. We started talking as the months went by. It came out that he was an alcoholic. And I was able to take this kid and encourage him, his choice, to get involved in the HIMSS program with PSA. And he was here about 3 weeks ago and asked me to pin his wings on at the night of the new pilot dinner. It's just cool. It's just full circle. It's not like, oh, look at these great things I did. No, look at the great things taking care of each other does in the collective. Amazing. So I will take a call from any of you guys, and we can get you plugged in because there are resources all around us. We also have a really neat guy named Doug Brown. I'm pushing him to join the Eagles, but at the end of the day, Doug did about 30 years of this critical incident response work for the union. And he said, you bet, write my name on the bathroom wall. Anybody can call. And he's more than happy to have a chat with you guys. And I hope to get him again out to some of these things because he wants to help. And as I've said, I want to get more and more out there as far as how we can help each other as retired pilots. And then the last thing, talk to professional trauma training. I had a coach say, Greg, you may not realize it, but I think you need to find a psychologist that knows a little bit about trauma. Me? You. And it was cool. I learned a lot of things I had no idea. That's when I learned that thing about my mom. That my mom, as strong as she is, she's a trauma survivor. You think that affected us as kids? You're darn right. Sure it did. And then this is probably one of the best books I've ever read. It's called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yep. It is.
Amen. Bessel van der Kolk, he's from Holland, but he came over in his 20s and started working. And here's what he found out. First, he started working at the VA, and he was helping Vietnam vets, right? Passionate about the work, learning important things. But at the time, you know what the VA said? We're not into this whole PTSD thing. That's not really our avenue. We take care of other things. This is the VA in the 70s. So he just said, you know what, shine on that. And he started working at other hospitals in Boston. And you know what happened? Here he's learned all these things from these war veterans and all their trauma. He goes and starts working with people from other segments of society who had gone through some of their own hard things. And guess what he found out? The symptoms are the same. Trauma is trauma is trauma. And he, I think he's in his 80s now, but this is like a landmark book. I've read it myself. And it's amazing how many different things that we go through. And our bodies tell us that's a lot of stress we feel because we've been through things and we haven't really integrated. And that's the difference that can make. So anyway, just some ideas. I'm not trying to be a psychoanalyst and say everybody here has trauma damage. That's not my point. But I heard a police officer recently say on a podcast, he said the average person in their life probably goes through 3 or 4 very traumatic events. Any guess what a police officer goes through in a 20-year career? 200 to 800. So if you've ever known any police officers, I'm sure you all have, God bless them. Especially the ones who can somehow keep it together and try to keep their marriages and their families together. Because they are literally taking on dysfunction themselves to cure dysfunction as a society. And that's a labor of love, and they have my full respect. Full circle, folks. That's kind of my reflections. I hope you got something out of it. Maybe you have a little bit more insight into the accident. Again, no blame games. Get online, you can draw your own conclusions. I do think that we lost some amazing people that day, and flying, as safe as it is, it's still an unforgiving medium from time to time. And do I feel lucky to be a part of it, and I hope you do too. Any questions? Thank you.